Right, starting to see connections over on YouTube and Facebook. So, if you're watching this in the video on demand, as they call it, if you're watching this after it went live, then look down below and you should see timestamps for particular questions. And today we're going to make it interesting because I'm going to take questions specifically about pronunciation issues. So maybe you want to know how to pronounce particular letters in the language that you're learning, or how to reduce your accent, or maybe you want to work off particular phonetic scripts and get your pronunciation from them just right. So if you have those kind of questions, happy to take them. If you have any other kind of questions, then I'm going to do more themed Q&As over the next few weeks, and I'll also keep doing the general ones that you're welcome to ask any kind of general questions. So let me see. I want to see if I can remove the YouTube from coming up here. There we go. Okay, so if nobody has specific questions to start off, I want to take on a question that I got yesterday, and I told them to come in today so I could help them out with it, and that is on how to pronounce the letter R. Okay, so hi to everyone who's just popped in. So that's Hassan, Sheriff, and Betul, who says hello in Korean. I saw Betul checked out my Turkish video yesterday. Vittorio, again, who's checking in with us. Very happy to see you again. All right. Okay, so JB does have a question, and I'm going to get to that. But I did want to answer somebody's question who had asked yesterday about the R. So the tapped R, like in the Spanish word caro, which means expensive. This one, there's several ways to do it. So maybe one of the following will help you. So one is that you can, if you're a native English speaker, don't try to change the R sound that we would make, like caro, and change that. Try to think of it as something between a D and an L. So what I would say to practice that is say cado, calo, cado, calo, and say that quickly, and notice where your tongue is, and try to kind of position it between those two spots. So it's like cado, cado, calo, cado, and then your tongue kind of naturally averages out to the caro. So that might work for you. That's one suggestion. Another suggestion is if you speak American English, then the sound in the middle of the word butter, I would pronounce this butter, but in America it's pronounced something more like butter. And that middle sound, even though it's written with T's, is actually very similar to the tapped R as it is. So something to keep in mind. Otherwise, in general, when it comes to any kind of phonetic understanding, my friend Idausa Ness has come up with lots of really interesting stuff. So if you search for his name on my blog, you'll see a lot of his guest posts where he talks about these kind of things. He is the person who showed me how those diagrams of mouth positions work and what they mean, and that helped me understand a lot of stuff. Okay, so I hope that helps with the single tap door. The trill door, the rrr, that one's harder, and that one I wouldn't be able to explain quickly in a video like this. That one I would recommend watching a separate video from native speakers and people who can explain pronunciation, things like that. So I've tried to explain that quickly, and I've never really succeeded. So the next question that I saw first come up was from JB, who's struggling with the uvular plosives. Since I'm not a linguist, I always tell people this, I am a language learner, I am a polyglot, but I am not a linguist. I don't have a background in linguistics, so I'm not really sure what that means. I'm being totally honest. I don't tend to associate technical ways of explaining things. So tell me, what is the equivalent letter in a language I might know, and I might be able to help you with that. Okay? All right. The next question I saw was actually from our moderator, Holly, today. She had put this question in just after that, and she wants to know about pronouncing the ayin. I'm probably not getting it right now. I did get it a little bit better when I originally did it. The ayin from Arabic. Sorry to everybody who knows Arabic and sees how horribly I'm pronouncing that. She took Arabic in school years ago, but the teacher was poor at explaining it. Doesn't seem much different from a short English sound, but this isn't right. Yeah, I mean, you can technically replace it with a simple vowel, but it's more of this kind of voiced, somewhat guttural sound. And I didn't get it perfectly, but I definitely know that I got it much closer by kind of thinking of any kind of guttural sound that you would be able to produce, like the chota or whatever, and then voice that out. So it's like, and then make it very short, so it does somewhat act like a vowel. That's my quick explanation, and I know people who speak Arabic much better than me will probably have some things to say about that and better explanations. But very quickly, that's kind of how I got it. I'm getting lots of questions about particular sounds that I would not be as good at because I don't speak some of those languages as high a level. So I'll try to answer what I can. Other ones I do recommend that you just search for it on YouTube, because you will find native speakers and people who do speak that language very well explain it very thoroughly, you know. Okay, but I do want to answer what I can today. So next one. So this is from Facebook, Tran Tui Tien, if I got that right, probably not, but I hope so. Who says, "Hi Benny, I'm told that I have French intonation when I speak English. Do you have any tips to improve on it?" Okay, this is an interesting question. So French intonation is interesting because in French they don't have specific like syllable stress on particular words as we do in most of the rest of the European languages. So this means that when you speak French, it tends to have that kind of sentence intonation rather than individual word intonation. So what helps me a lot when it comes to intonation, not just in French, but in languages in general, is if you are listening to native speaker content, then you can try to mimic the pronunciation, and that's great. But separate to that, I would try to mimic the intonation. So, for example, if you listen to some audio on a podcast or something you've recorded from somewhere that somebody said for you, whatever it may be, and they say something like, I don't know, est-ce que tu viens d'Irlande? Or est-ce que tu es Irlandais? And if I take that, est-ce que tu es Irlandais? Then don't worry about the pronunciation part, but just think of the musicality. So it's do 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 do, and try to mimic that. Try to kind of sing along with do 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 at the same kind of rhythm and the beat, and having particular like parts of it that get stressed a bit more than others and that goes up. That is something that I actually remember I actually picked this trick up from Luca. You guys know Luca Lampariello. He, in an interview I did with him, gave this really cool trick to me that I hadn't really thought of separate to my accent training, that he would like have this kind of ignoring the sounds and just tapping out the language and going up and down with the intonation. So for French or for any other language, I would try to take sentences people are saying and forget about the pronunciation temporarily and try and mimic that musicality and then go back and apply it to the actual words. Okay? That's a little trick that I would recommend for French and for any other language. So I hope that helps, Tran. Okay. So next question is over on YouTube, and this is having an accent bad? Very good question. I like this question. Is having an accent bad? Okay, so when I'm a beginner learner, I have to say, I think trying to work on your accent as a beginner is a very poor use of time. It's a bad way to spend your time. So if you want, because your focus has to be able to communicate to people. So if you have a strong accent and you're a beginner learner, then it's okay. It really doesn't matter as long as people can understand you. So in my case, for instance, with my Mandarin, and I got my tones wrong as a beginner learner, that did impede people's ability to understand me. So that was imperative that I got my tones right. But in most other languages, when you would hear me, if I would speak Spanish and say something like, Hola, soy Benny de Irlanda. ¿Qué tal contigo? If I say that, it's a super strong accent. You know I'm a beginner learner. You know I'm a native English speaker. But you are still likely to understand what I'm saying. You might have to kind of struggle for a minute. But it's way more important that I get those words right. So in that case, I would say as a beginner learner, an accent needs to be one of your absolute lowest priorities. It needs to be something that you're not actually spending that much time on. So everything I'm talking about today, I'm considering it more like if you have a specific thing that's preventing people from understanding you as a beginner, then work on that. But I'm thinking more things to work on later on. So having that accent is not a bad thing. So then when you get to an intermediate stage, and even when you get to the advanced stage, it's still fine if you have an accent. I know we all want to have zero accent and pronounce things exactly like a native speaker does. And I've had projects that try to focus on that, to pass myself off as a native, focusing on musicality and so on of the language and seeing if I can speak for long enough that they still think I'm a native speaker. And it's been very, very interesting. I've really enjoyed those projects. I've learned a lot to help me improve my language skills. But they have not really changed my experience of interacting with people when they do know where I'm from. Because if you talk to somebody long enough, they're going to say, where do you come from? And they're going to find out I'm Irish, unless I lie to them. And, you know, if your goals are to become an international spy, then maybe you want to take a different approach. But having an accent is actually charming. It's part of who you are. And it's okay if you have that little twang. Ultimately, you're never going to completely lose the ability, you're never going to completely lose that sense of speaking influenced by your native tongue. I've met people who, as adults, have learned languages and they sound almost as good as a native speaker, and they probably do sound like a native speaker for the first few minutes that I meet them, but they will eventually slip up. They will say something that is pronounced just a little bit off, and that's fine. Richard Simcott actually also told me this. He said he's never met an adult language learner who like absolutely always passes themselves off as a native speaker 100% of the time. And like part of it is not knowing the language at a deep enough level, but part of it is just intonation, accent, things that you still kind of slip through. So having an accent is not bad. It is a fun thing that you can work on as an advanced learner, but I think it is one of the lower priorities. There are much more important things that will help you to express yourself. I think having a very strong accent is something you should try to work on when you're an intermediate learner. You want to try and sound as close as you can to people who speak the language, because then they'll understand you easier. It'll slow things down a lot less. That's very important for fluency. So you do have to try and get a close pronunciation. But having an accent is just a part of language learning, and it's okay. So I definitely don't think that having an accent is bad. I hope that answers that question. All right. Next, over on YouTube, Doug M24 asks, for Chinese learners, how do you avoid the laowai accent? How do you deal with regional accents? Okay. So that's kind of a similar question. How do you avoid having an accent like a foreigner? It's a similar thing to, like, firstly, what I just said, that it's okay if you do have that accent, especially because when you're in China, if you're coming from a country that has a different kind of skin tone and whatever, they know by looking at you that you are I forget the tones, laowai, or I forget which tones on that word, that you're a foreigner. And it's so interesting that people would try to remove that accent entirely. I think it helps you blend in enough when you're doing it in other languages that you might actually look like a native speaker. But don't avoid having the accent. Just try to have as good tones as you possibly can, as good an accent as you possibly can, so that people understand you better, so that you're not slowing down conversations. If you still have a tiny accent, you would actually be surprised how it's so ironic that sometimes having that accent helps with your language learning, because it makes you more interesting. People see you're a foreigner and they want to know about you. They hear it and they ask that question, oh wow, where are you from? Whereas if you somehow had like a perfect accent, they would just think you're some random guy. So ironically, having the accent has actually helped my language learning in some ways. So something to consider. But how do you deal with regional accents? That's a completely different topic. And let me kind of cover that for all languages in general. How to deal with dialects and regional accents. The first thing I would do is, again, as a beginner, don't worry about it. Learn the standard version of the language. That's all you need to care about. But when you have that down and you're able to speak standard Mandarin, or you're able to speak standard French, then I would work within the language itself and try to find ways to see how particular dialects are different. I always tell people with French, I like the book Le Québécois en 10 leçons, and this is, if you look on my blog, there's a guest post about that. With Spanish, I found books in Spanish about Spanish from Argentina, Spanish from Colombia, and Spanish from even different cities within Spain. So you find better materials when you do it that way. And I remember when I was traveling in China, and I at that stage I had conversational Mandarin. And I was going all over the country. I took a train like 2,000 kilometers into China, and I would talk to people on the train. I wanted to get some practice. I wanted to meet people, find out what life was like for them and so on. And I started noticing a lot of interesting changes in the accent. And I would ask them, because people know this. If you ask me as an Irish person how my Irish is different to, like, let's call it standard British English that they tend to learn in Europe, then I could list things to you. I could say how we soften our consonants at the end of words. I could list to you specific terms that are unique to Ireland. So you can get a lot of information from native speakers, but of course, that's kind of you have the catch-22. If you're a beginner, you can't have a complex enough conversation with a native speaker unless they're doing it in your mother tongue. So focus on learning the standard language well, and then you can just ask natives, do they know any good books about this dialect? Do they have any tips for you about how you can kind of tweak your accent so that it sounds more like it's from this country or this city or this region, and whatever it might be. So that's what I would suggest. And let me just see what questions I see popping up in the stream today. And by the way, today I'm doing it for just 30 minutes, just to give you guys the heads up. But of course, link in the top right, you'll see the Beam link. I'm going to be over there playing some games, word games with people today as well. So you're welcome to join me there. Okay. So, how do you pronounce, this is from Paris Tansley, how do you pronounce the R in French? Okay. So, if you are, if you're speaking French, this one, it comes from the back of your throat. So think of the what they call a guttural sound. That is one of those linguistic words. I do know that word. There's plenty I don't know, but I do know that word. So think of it as coming in from the back of your throat, like the sound that you might make in loch, although that is a different one, and it is voiced. So something like the loch sound, you don't kind of vibrate your larynx or whatever part of the anatomy is. My God, I don't know linguistics terms or anatomy terms. Very, very hard to talk about these things. Anyway, so you have the which is not voiced, and then you can have the and that's kind of the same. It's the same basic sound, except I've got this little hum to it. So I'm making a sound like that I could make by closing my mouth, like but I'm doing it while doing the guttural sound. So that is very, very close to the French R. It's not exactly there. It's a little softer, and it changes depending on the region. And some people may have better ways of explaining it, but in general, that is the closest way that you can get to the baseline of that kind of typically guttural R in French, that you're doing a voiced guttural sound. Okay? And then Rachel Waters had asked, how do you deal with multiple vowels together in French? Multiple vowels together. This for me is more of an exercise in memory, because it's associating what those vowels represent. So you might associate, I don't know, the AU as having the O sound. You may associate, I don't know what other multiple vowels off the top of my head. Like, it's because this isn't really a case of the multiple vowels themselves being the problem, because they just represent one sound, or they represent like one sound ending and another sound beginning. So any good French dictionary will have the International Phonetic Alphabet, and if you are truly into language learning, and especially if you want to learn multiple languages, I would recommend that you try to spend an afternoon understanding what the International Phonetic Alphabet is, or IPA, because it has all these weird symbols, but the majority of the vowels and consonants that it represents are what you would expect them to be. But if you learn the International Phonetic Alphabet, it means that when you look something up in a dictionary, which is especially true for something like French that isn't as one-to-one as something like Spanish might be, for instance, you will see each sound that you have to produce. And that is how I personally got used to a lot of these French sounds. Is I would look it up in a dictionary or online. I'm sure online, loads of dictionaries online also have the phonetic pronunciation, and Wikipedia does for a lot of words. I know it does for English. I forget if the French Wikipedia has the IPA. You would see it in a quick look online. But essentially, you see that word, you see how the phonetic spelling is from the IPA, and you see that association. And then you try to remember it. If you're bad at remembering that, maybe make some flashcards. Make a specific flashcard, an Anki deck or whatever, for the 5 vowel combinations that you have trouble with, and that could help out. But otherwise, it depends, because they have different rules. Like, these vowels are pronounced that way, these vowels together are pronounced that way. So it's not like a hard fast rule. It's just a case of seeing them listed out, or seeing the ones that you have trouble with and making a note, and just seeing it enough times that it starts to burn into your memory. And especially learning it in context, if you hear the word pronounced out loud, not just seeing the International Phonetic Alphabet version, but hearing it pronounced in a sentence, then that'll help loads. Okay. All right. So let's see. What else can I answer here? Okay, JB got back to me on when I asked him what the uvular or whatever thing he said was. They are sounds, or he, so she. I'm sorry, I'm guessing genders when I see letters that don't represent a name that I recognize. Okay, so they are sounds that are made like K and G, but with the uvula instead of with the velum. You're killing me here, JBB. I'm asking you to explain what the term you said was, and you say they're like the K and G, but made with the uvula instead of with the velum. What on earth is a velum? That sounds like something snakes give you when they bite you, venom. I don't know what a velum is. I'm sorry, I'm not good at anatomy. You're gonna have to give me a third explanation on that one. Okay. So yeah, Holly could hear the difference on the one I said at the start. Okay. All right. So next one that Holly's got me for me here is from Marcella on YouTube. How did you improve your tones in Mandarin? Very good question. So with tones, first you need to realize that you can mimic the tones in Asian languages in general, for the most part, because we do have a lot of those tones in European languages, just that we represent them only as emotional reactions or as conveying meaning in some way beyond how the words would be. So, for instance, you raise the tone, as it were, the intonation on a question when it's a question. So that is something that I would apply to. I think it's the third tone in Mandarin, that you have the and that kind of rising part I thought of associated with the asking a question. But there are other ways to do it. So the best way is having a native speaker correct you. I just found a teacher and got her to. She gave me some words that were written in pinyin with the symbols over the vowels that show whether it's going up or down or whatever it is, and I would try to say the words, and she would correct me. And it's an annoying way to do it because you're saying it wrong, and then you're hearing it right, and you're like, okay, is it ma? And she's like, no, it's ma. And you're like, no, I thought that's what I said. And it's frustrating, but that is by far the easiest way, that you just have someone drill it out of you, that you finally like see those subtle differences. And otherwise just lots of exposure, because if you're just trying to produce it, then you may not necessarily see the difference. But if you're listening to enough Mandarin and hearing those tones, and I also really like how the podcast series Chinese Class 101, you can see a link on my blog. I talk about the podcast I like. I like how they do it when they're explaining in the basic lessons. And then I also took Michelle Thomas' course when I was doing Mandarin. And this wasn't made by himself, but by one of the proteges who worked with him. And there they helped you remember the tones and associate with them using colors. That I thought was a very interesting way of doing it. But that's mostly remembering it to tie it in with word meaning. When it comes to actually producing it, it's kind of like what I said a few minutes ago with the intonation of an entire sentence, something that applies to European languages. But as you're saying it, so maybe someone says a full sentence for you in Mandarin, but instead of trying to get the actual consonants and vowels right, you're just like, and whatever, as random sounds. You try to follow that musicality, and that can make a very big difference. Okay? So, last couple of questions before I wrap up with you guys today. And again, make sure that you are subscribed. Click the notification icon and you'll see when these come up, and you can be among the first questions that I see, so I can tackle them quickly. Since there's loads of questions, I will come back to pronunciation another day, because I know I didn't get to a lot of your questions today. So sorry about that. But I'll take another maybe 2 or 3 before I wrap up today. So Caitlin Maloney on Facebook asks, do you have any recommendations for learning practicing sounds that don't exist in your native language, or combination of sounds that are completely and utterly foreign? For instance, a native English speaker trying to figure out the consonant clusters common in Russian, or a Mandarin speaker learning how to end words with a consonant without adding an extra vowel or syllable. Yeah, okay. So I remember, like, for instance, when I was learning Thai, and I needed to say just very simple, like, Kop Kun Kap, then that sound was so tricky for me. And I'm probably getting it wrong still, but I'm getting it better than I initially did, because in English, when we have a P at the end, crap, you have this plosive, like a Daffy Duck exaggerated P. But in other languages, especially the likes of Thai and so on, you actually have the P end, so it's like krap, and you don't make a following sound. So ultimately, there's a lot of sounds like that you just do not have in your mother tongue, and you just need someone to explain them to you. So, like I said at the start, I explained the R, the kind of single tapped R in Spanish, because I do think that we have that in English to a certain degree. So that's not as hard to explain to somebody. But the trilled R, the rrr, that is not something that we have a very easy association with. And the way I learned that was just having native speakers explain it to me and drill it into me and correct me as I got it wrong. I would be like, okay, so is it... And he'd be like, no, it's... So I said, okay. So it was, probably it could have gone up on YouTube as a comical, ridiculous video. Irish guy takes 4 hours to not trill the R. But ultimately, that is the way that you learn. And if the sounds do not exist in your native language, you have the same mouth, the same tongue, the same, all of these anatomical features in your head and neck and whatever, words that I do not know, uvulars and velums or whatever they are. So we all have these same things across the world. There is no sound that you cannot produce if another human being can make them, unless they are unique and, a mutant or something. So if billions of people can make the sound, or hundreds of millions of people can make the sound, then you can make the sound too. So all you need to do is practice it. It might take you a while. It took me weeks until I finally felt like I could do that trilled R in Spanish, but I got there. So I think that the issue is a lot of people will try, like they'll try for 5 minutes, they won't get it, and then they'll give up. So if it doesn't exist in your mother tongue, have someone explain it to you. Search for it on YouTube, because you won't be the first person to ask, and see how they talk to you, talk and explain it, and try to mimic them. And if you get it wrong, try again, and try to talk to a native speaker about it. Try to research the mouth positions and so on, if that helps for you. Try to see what it might sound like the closest thing in English. Just try different things until eventually you have something close to that, and you do not have to get it 100% right. Right now, as just the ability to pronounce it enough that people understand you, you just have to be able to say something pretty close, and later on you can try to keep tweaking it. You can teach an old dog new tricks. You can refine those sounds a little bit better. So I would highly recommend just talking to a native speaker and figuring it out. Anything that you can't find an explanation of is something that you can't find an explanation that's very short. You can still find a longer explanation. You can get this. All right. There's another question from Holly. Do Irish English speakers pronounce the TH like a T, or is it regional variation? This is a very funny topic because it depends. Like in Dublin, there are parts of the country and some newscasters who will say things like 3, whereas a lot of us, I'm technically countryside. It depends. Like, what does countryside mean? But I'm from 2 hours outside of Dublin, and so for me it's always been tree, and I would say 33 and a third, and get lots of laughs. I was a maths teacher in New York when I first came to America when I was like 18 or something, and I said 33 and a third, and they laughed their heads off. And I, believe it or not, this is a fact for you guys. I had to learn how to pronounce that TH sound. As a 18-year-old, I couldn't say it. So I had to go back after the teaching math class, and I had to be like, free, and I had to learn how to say 3, because I couldn't. But I did learn it. So yeah, that's a random point that us Irish people don't really have the th. A lot of us do. Some of us do naturally say it. I didn't. And now I do. I speak with international people, so I try to say it. I forget it. So I have a random, inconsistent way of speaking English, unfortunately. Okay, Fierce Gaming asked, what are the differences in pronunciation between European Portuguese and Brazilian Portuguese? Very good question. Hard to summarize quickly, but I would say Brazilian Portuguese is more open. European Portuguese is more closed in how they express things, how they say things. I was listening to the Eurovision last night, and as the guy was singing, I could see his mouth was different to a Brazilian. A Brazilian would open their mouth and they would pronounce things like I can't mimic the Portuguese accent, so I wouldn't do a good comparison. But essentially, that's one part. Another is it's more guttural, because the letter R, for instance, at the start of the word and when it's doubled, and in some cases at the end of the word, it is pronounced like an H in Brazil. So, big famous city is called Rio de Janeiro, whereas a Portuguese person may pronounce that more like Rio. I don't get it very well. I'm not 100% sure, but it's more guttural, more closed. So it's interesting because if you don't know Portuguese, it sounds a little bit like it could be Russian to some people. But don't tell a Portuguese person that. They don't like it. Okay. Now I'm going to start wrapping it up. Thanks everybody for joining me today. I'm sorry that I didn't get to a lot of your questions. Very, very interesting questions here. And this tells me that this is a topic you guys want me to get back to. So if I didn't get to your question, then hold on to it, put it into a bag, seal it, and store it in the fridge so that you can take it out and it's nice and fresh for the next time that we do this. And because I do see questions I actually really want to answer, but I will get to them another time. So yeah, I'm going to be online on Beam for a lot of the rest of the day, coming and going. So check me out over there. And otherwise, I will try to do another one of these Q&As. The best way to find out when they'll be is to either join the email list. So go to fluentin3months.com at the bottom. Enter your email there. I tell people on Friday, if I know ahead of time that I'm going to be doing Friday or Saturday, that I'm going to be doing a live hangout in the next couple of days. And then otherwise, of course, click the notifications icon and then you'll never miss it. It'll always pop up as you're online. So that's about it. I love helping you guys figure this stuff out, and I will of course be doing lots more live Q&As as often as I can. So, thanks for watching everybody, and happy language learning!